Shindo's past is soaked in tragedy. Years ago, an entire apartment complex, including his parents, was massacred in a way that defied all logic. No suspects, no explanations, just blood, bodies, and a mystery that never let go of him. But just as he's starting his job, the nightmares return more vivid than ever, and with them comes something much, much worse. The anime opens eerie jump clips from one scene that looks like they are about to release a dangerous monster. These guys are on robes, so it has to be a cult. The other scenes are just kids playing around. When the Cape guys finished something that looked like a prison world that could hold a curse as bad as Sukuna, a hand pulled out of the cube. And that's when chaos erupted. Creatures that looked like they were handcrafted by the devil were everywhere, tearing through flesh like it was paper. There was blood everywhere. Shindo was running away with his sister. She slipped on some blood. These monsters got her, and before he could raise a finger, she was gone. Just before the monsters could get him, a lady half-dressed sliced the demons in half. He stood there panting, then he woke up panting. His sister was right there in her undies. He was stunned to see her there like that. They got dressed and ran to school. It was the last day of school and the first day of his life after school. Graduation day is supposed to be the start of a new life. Instead, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, not paranoia, something real. He felt it slithering down his spine, unseen but heavy, as if the past was creeping into the present. He gazed into the space as his friend walked away from him. The ceremony went by in a blur. He came in late and left at the speed of light. Let's not forget that he almost got himself expelled on the last day of school. And just like that, the real nightmare began. Shindo reported for duty at the Shibuya police station, where his senior officers welcomed him the only way they knew how. High voice commands, cigarette smoke, and a pile of paperwork, but before he could even settle in, the LT heard him saying things about him, and now the LT has punished Shindo and his friend to clean the toilets on each floor. The first case landed on his desk. It was brutal. Gruesome murders, bodies torn apart like a wild beast had been let loose in a locked room. The crime scenes were almost artistic in their violence. Limbs arranged in scattered patterns, blood smeared across the walls like cryptic messages. One of the officers muttered, "What the hell could even do this?" flipping through the crime scene photos. That was the question, wasn't it? No human could have done this. And yet, the deeper Shindo looked into the reports, the more familiar it all felt. The way the victims were killed, it was just like the Machida massacre. The same massacre that took his parents' lives 5 years ago. The case that had no suspects, no explanations, just bodies. Just when things couldn't get weirder, Shindo found himself face to face with Sakura again. This time, she wasn't just some mysterious girl in his dreams. She was standing right in front of him, wearing a Toko uniform, and she wasn't alone. They weren't just some government unit with extra authority. No, they were something else entirely. Something secret, something not meant for the public eye. And judging by their demeanor, they weren't too thrilled about Shindo poking around. Sakura warned that Shindo should stay out of this. Her tone was flat, but her eyes, they looked almost sad. Right, because that always worked. Instead of backing off, Shindo's curiosity only grew. He started digging, asking the wrong questions, prying into things that weren't meant to be found. The deeper he went, the more he realized that Toko wasn't just investigating these murders, they were expecting them. That night, Shindo found himself alone in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, exhaustion weighing him down. But sleep never came peacefully. This time when he woke up, he wasn't in his bed. He was standing in the middle of a ruined city, just like in his nightmares. The buildings stretched up into darkness, twisted and broken. The air was thick, suffocating and humming with something unnatural. Then he heard it. Footsteps wet and uneven. Something was dragging itself across the ground, and then he saw them. Hulking, skinless creatures, their bodies a grotesque fusion of human and monster. Their empty eye sockets locked onto him, mouths splitting open in a silent, gaping scream. Number, this wasn't a dream. Shindo stumbled back, heart hammering in his chest, but his feet felt glued to the ground. The creatures moved closer, their twisted limbs twitching with hunger. Just as one of them lunged, steel flashed, a blade sliced through the creature like paper, its body splitting apart in a wet, sickening crunch. And standing there, weapon dripping with fresh blood, was Sakura. But she wasn't alone. Toko had arrived, their swords gleaming. Sakura wiped her blade clean, looking at him with something like pity. She explained that he was now involved whether he liked it or not. These creatures called phantoms weren't just random monsters. They were the real reason behind the Machida massacre. They were the ones responsible for his parents' deaths. And Toko's job was to hunt them down before they could wipe out the rest of the city. Shindo didn't know whether to scream, run, or laugh hysterically. His entire life he had wanted answers. Now that he had them, they felt like a curse. And then, as if to drive the nightmare even deeper, Sakura added one last thing. The words meant nothing to him, not yet, but the way she said them, the way her voice barely wavered, told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just some case, this was fate, and there was no escaping it. Shindo had signed up for a normal job, a badge, a gun, a career that made sense. What he got instead was blood, monsters, and a truth that felt far worse than any lie. The world wasn't what he thought it was, and now he was part of the nightmare. Whether he survived it, that was another question entirely. They had already shot the terrifying creatures down, but guess what? These ugly freaks were getting back up like they didn't just get blasted to pieces, and to make things worse, their chests had some nightmare fuel faces, and yes, those faces could talk. Because why just be horrifying when you can also be chatty? One of these creatures snatched up Shindo, the world's most unremarkable cop, and proudly declared that he was the chosen one. But before this loser could get his ticket punched, a stunning red-haired woman appeared, slicing the monster to pieces like she was prepping meat for a barbecue. Shindo, still holding his gun like it was worth anything, just stared dumbly as she explained that, unless they chopped off the creepy talking faces, these things wouldn't die. Fortunately, some men in black swooped in, cutting through the zombies like they were made of soggy paper. The disgusting parasites slithered out of the destroyed bodies, but the special ops guys stomped them out like cockroaches. Meanwhile, the chief of police, displaying his world-class ignorance, demanded answers. He just lost one of his men, so he wanted to know what was going on. The chief, still in his clueless phase, almost got himself infected, but Redhead saved his life by slicing the parasite in half. Now, the chief wanted real answers, but the special ops crew hit him with the classic "you don't want to know" response. Instead, they told him to tell the press that this whole disaster was just some gang war. The chief, still trying to act tough, protested, but then one of the agents brought up his daughter, and suddenly this man lost all his fight. Defeated, he stormed off like a child who just got told he couldn't have dessert. Meanwhile, Shindo was standing there, heart eyes in full effect, staring at the red-haired warrior goddess who just saved his life. He clearly had already planned their wedding. He tried introducing himself, but she cut straight to the point, warning him that these creatures were after survivors from the Machida incident. He claimed he didn't remember anything, but she reminded him that they had spoken before. Before he could embarrass himself further, his chief yelled at him to stop standing around like a useless sack of potatoes and get his ugly face moving. At home, Shindo's sister had prepared a celebratory meal for his first day on the job, but when he sat down and looked at the food, his soul left his body. It looked exactly like the parasites from earlier. Congratulations, dinner was now ruined. Elsewhere, the chief and another officer were digging into research about these parasites. They found a locked site full of classified pictures and needed a special key to access them. Turns out these creatures had been around for a while, but the truth had been swept under the rug like just another serial murder case. Then they found something truly chilling, photos from a burning building incident. And there it was, clear as day, some kind of winged demon just casually chilling on the building like this was some horror movie. The chief, still mad about being left in the dark, decided that no matter what, he was going to get to the bottom of this. That night, Shindo had another one of his cursed dreams. This time, instead of a woman, it was a small girl drawing something on the ground. He woke up screaming like a child, and his sister burst into the room ready to clown him. The moment he told her he dreamed about a little girl, she called him a pervert and promptly beat the nonsense out of him. The next day at shooting practice, Shindo proved that he was, at the very least, good at one thing. His shots were dead on, earning him some respect, but of course his mind was still fixated on Redhead. He tried talking to his friends about her, but these guys could not have cared less. All they wanted to discuss was an upcoming mixer, priorities. Even when they went out to eat, he brought her up again, and they promptly dropped the subject like it was hot garbage. Frustrated, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He went back to the site of the original incident, but the place was locked down tight. The guards didn't care that he was an officer, they weren't letting him in. But since when has that ever stopped an anime protagonist? He scaled the fence like a ninja and went straight to his old apartment. It was a horror show, blood everywhere, total destruction, and nothing but bad memories. He stepped onto the balcony and noticed a massive hole in the ground. Curiosity got the best of him, so he climbed down to check it out. That's when he saw strange markings on the floor. Suddenly, his dream started making sense. He had spoken to that little girl before. As he got closer to the hole, some ominous energy oozed out, and just like that, a mark appeared on his hand. Meanwhile, the chief had a breakthrough. He finally figured out that the extra faces on the zombies were parasites taking over human bodies. But in a much more terrifying development, somewhere deep in the woods, a demon casually walked in and started spitting out more parasites. These things wasted no time infecting some unsuspecting men. Then the police got word about some major disturbance. They rushed to the scene, guns blazing, and once again their bullets were about as useful as throwing marshmallows. The chief and Shindo arrived later, packing some bigger guns. The chief took a shot, but guess what? It still didn't work. The special forces team arrived and cleaned up the mess in seconds. Their swords sliced through the monsters like they were butter. While all this chaos unfolded, Shindo was doing what he did best, being useless and staring at the redhead like a love-struck idiot. Shindo, the walking disaster, finally had a chance to talk to the girl of his dreams, but as expected, things went downhill faster than his IQ level. Instead of giving him any useful information, she fed him some half-baked nonsense. She confirmed she was the mysterious girl drawing earlier and claimed she was a survivor. A survivor of what? Bad dialogue? Before he could get any actual answers, she dropped another cryptic bomb saying he'd understand soon enough. Then she mentioned some walking corpses spreading parasites like it's a new viral trend. Meanwhile, back at the crime scene, the chief was on fire. Figuratively, of course, but given his temper, it wouldn't be surprising if he actually combusted. The cleanup crew arrived, swooping in like janitors at a horror convention, taking the bodies and parasites away. Back home, Shindo noticed a weird mark on his hand. Before he could process this, his nosy sister busted into the bathroom like she owned the place. He told her to get lost, but she hit him with the ultimate sibling card. She can do whatever she wants because she's family. Not even 5 seconds in and she was already ruining his day. She started rambling about a mixer and how she lined up some girls for him because she didn't want him ending up as a lonely cat dad. Then she noticed the tattoo-like marks on his hands and told him to see a doctor since he had been injured during his last encounter with those freaks. Meanwhile, at the top of a nearby building, some demon was casually manifesting like it was a rooftop party. Seriously, how is nobody seeing this thing? Cut to Shindo, now reluctantly at the hospital, accompanied by his overly concerned sister, who was acting like a paranoid grandma. The doctor, barely taking things seriously, waved it off as nothing major, just hyperpigmentation, but then things got weird. The doctor asked if this idiot had been exposed to violent radiation, which, given Shindo's luck, wasn't even a crazy question. He denied it, but his blood test showed something funky going on. His sister, ever the dictator, ordered him to stay put while she fetched his medication. Naturally, this fool did the exact opposite and wandered off like a lost puppy. He forgot his phone, of course he did, so he went looking for a payphone. Yes, a payphone, because apparently this is the 90s now. He called his boss, got yelled at as expected, and then somehow got sidetracked by an old brick building, because why not? As he got closer, he noticed 2 guards at the entrance. The whole place gave off bad news vibes, but since common sense wasn't one of his strong points, he ignored every instinct telling him to leave. The marks on his hand flared up again, and instead of running away like a normal person, he snuck inside. The interior was surprisingly modern, completely different from the old exterior. Then, in true horror movie fashion, he stumbled upon a patient wrapped up like a mummy. He barely had time to process this before he passed out like a chump. Meanwhile, back at the station, 2 of Shindo's colleagues were bad-mouthing the chief, calling him obsessed. But because karma works fast, the chief appeared behind them, catching them in the act. He made it crystal clear that when those monsters show up again, they need to be taken down before SpecSec gets involved. Shindo, still proving to be the world's worst decision-maker, woke up in a strange room. And who was waiting for him? His fiery, red-haired mystery girl. She informed him that the bandaged-up patient was her younger brother, a victim from the Machida incident 5 years ago. She recalled how she had found him that day, cut to pieces and barely alive. Since then, he had been dependent on oxygen just to survive. Shindo tried to press for more answers, but all she told him was that SpecSec existed to eliminate those creatures. While they were busy having their dramatic little moment, Shindo's sister was back at the main hospital looking for him. Meanwhile, in the blood testing lab, things took a turn for the grotesque. Those parasites decided to invade, taking over the lab tech like a bad case of the Mondays. He screamed, drawing others in, only for them to get infected too. Shindo's sister, having the worst luck possible, heard the screams and went to investigate. and surprise, she almost became zombie chow. One of the infected got a little too close, managing to injure her before she could react. Just when things were about to go full horror movie, Shindo, who apparently had a superhero moment, burst onto the scene, grabbing his sister just in time. They made a break for it, but instead of, continuing to run for their lives, they decided to stop and start shooting. Classic horror movie stupidity. Things were looking grim until Redhead McBadass arrived, slicing through the creatures like she was auditioning for an action movie. More SpecSec agents showed up, cleaning up the mess as usual. Later, Shindo and Redhead had a rooftop chat where she finally gave these creatures a name, Phantoms. She explained that they crawled straight out of the pits of hell to feast on human flesh. Great. Cut to the much anticipated mixer. Everyone was there, including Shindo, who looked more miserable than usual. Shindo's sister took the stage to introduce a very special guest. It was the Chief. Why was he here now? This episode started at night, but don't worry, it wasn't some horror movie level parasite invasion, just some shady trucks rolling into a compound like they were about to drop off illegal snacks. Turns out they were delivering parasites, which is way worse. Meanwhile, our boy Shindo was making the ugliest facial expression known to mankind because his sister was setting him up on a date. She was convinced that if she didn't intervene, he'd end up living with nothing but a pack of stray dogs. He immediately rejected the idea because he knew she'd set him up with another weirdo. She noticed he hadn't been eating, which, let's be honest, wasn't shocking given that he'd been traumatized by zombie parasites. Instead of eating, he ran off to work, where a mountain of paperwork was waiting to slap him in the face. Shindo and his buddy were drowning in frustration, mumbling about how their boss was obsessed with this case. The chief's assistant, who actually looked like a real cop, walked in and asked if they'd found anything. Of course, they had nothing because they were too busy slacking off. Then, Shindo and his colleague went into the chief's office where the chief demanded a way to expose those SpecSec guys. That's when Shindo remembered something about the girl his sister wanted him to date. Apparently, she worked at the special laboratory that conveniently covered up these kinds of incidents. He called his sister and told her to set up the date. Shindo showed up to the date dressed like an absolute circus clown.
Only language you speak is failure!
His bright yellow anime protagonist hair was already bad enough. If bad fashion decisions were a crime, he'd be locked up for life. He got to the square and immediately regretted everything. Then his date, Yukino, arrived looking like a normal, functioning human being. She immediately pointed out that he looked like his sister, which was not a compliment. They started walking together and the awkward silence was deafening. Neither of these clueless fools knew how to hold a conversation, let alone flirt. They ended up at a restaurant and of course Saya had to show up in full detective mode. She was spying on the date, worried about the horrible restaurant her brother picked. Shindo and Yukino then went to a park where he bought them coffee and tried to sound smart. He mentioned that he heard from Saya that she worked in a medical lab, but she thought that kind of job made girls seem boring. They continued their mind-numbing conversation until he suddenly said he had something to ask. Meanwhile, Saya ditched her spying partner and tried to call Yukino, but the phone was off. Shindo and Yukino eventually arrived at her office. After getting clearance, she took him to her desk and made him some black coffee, laughing at his tragic coffee preferences. She joked about coming over to cook for him and his sister one day, but he wasn't interested. All he cared about was what kind of work was being done here. She took him to an archaeological section and started rambling about alchemy, how it could supposedly turn lead into gold. Then she casually mentioned an alchemy experiment that brought demons to life and showed him a book with eerie-looking illustrations. One of the drawings looked suspiciously familiar. She kept scrolling and explaining, but honestly nobody was paying attention. Then she flipped to a page with detailed drawings of the parasites, and the resemblance was too obvious to ignore. That's when Shindo's dad barged in and told him he shouldn't be here. Shindo pulled the classic "I'm a detective" card, but his dad kicked them both out anyway. As they stood outside, Yukino was about to head back in when he told her about the incidents and how all the evidence was being hidden here. He also explained that whatever she was researching was connected to the monsters attacking society. She wanted to respond, but some men were already watching them, so she had to keep quiet. Shindo went home still deep in thought, trying to reach Yukino. His sister told him she was at work, so he decided to step out that evening and check out the lab himself. Around the lab, the devil himself was having a full-course meal on some unfortunate security guards. Shindo heard the screams and ran straight toward the danger because apparently survival instincts weren't his thing. he came face to face with a monster and attempted to fight it. It was pathetic. The monster threw him around like a ragdoll and was about to infect him when, for some reason, he managed to block the attack with some kind of shield. It was weird, even he didn't understand what just happened. Just as things were about to go south, the SpecSec team arrived and started fighting the creature. It took some damage, but still managed to escape. The redhead girl from SpecSec noticed Shindo's strange tattoos this time, and it looked like she might finally tell him what was going on. Shingo woke up in the hospital, and the only thing running through his empty head was what happened the night before. His sister came bursting in, screaming like he got sliced in half and stitched back together like some Frankenstein experiment. Bro almost got a one-way ticket to the afterlife. Not long after, his colleague ran in, and suddenly, his sister stopped acting like a human volcano about to erupt. His buddy reassured them both, saying they didn't have to worry. The only thing that could take Shingo out now was hunger, because apparently that was his biggest threat. His sister dashed out to get food like she was in a relay race. Shingo, being the fraud he is, pulled off the bandages on his hands to show his guy that he wasn't actually that hurt, he was just wrapped up for dramatic effect. Then the redhead walked in asking for a moment alone. His guy took the hint and left. Shingo, still dumber than a sack of bricks, showed her the tattoo on his arm and asked what was going on. She hit him with some cryptic nonsense about staying far away from those creatures. Oh, and fun fact, that mark on his arm? It's called the Mark of Destruction. What a comforting name! At first it was just on his forearm, but now it was crawling up his arm like it was trying to consume him. Saya walked back in, saw the redhead, and suddenly the room was more tense than a horror movie jump scare. Meanwhile, Shindo was in his office, and everyone was telling him to take a break, even the chief. But of course, this man was built different, or just built stupid, and insisted he was fine. But then the chief got a call from the higher-ups, and surprise, surprise, they had just given the green light to tear apart the SpecSec offices. He ordered his men to dig up every piece of dirt they could find and burn that place to the ground, figuratively speaking. Shindo, thinking he was about to be in the middle of the action, got humbled real quick when the chief told him to stay behind and clean toilets as punishment for making him worry for nothing. His new crush appeared out of nowhere and asked if he was okay. Turns out Saya told her about the accident and she came to check up on him like he was some helpless baby deer. He handed her some water and they sat down to talk. Just when it seemed like a normal conversation, she pulled out a picture of some freakish monster arm. Shindo's 2 remaining brain cells finally started working, and he noticed some suspicious guys lurking around. He told Yukino they should head to the roof because nothing says privacy like standing on top of a building where anyone can see you. Once they got up there, she spilled the tea. Her dad had been investigating weird creatures like the ones at the crime scene. Apparently, he didn't even come into this whole mess as some monster hunter. He was just a biotechnologist researching evolution. But then things got real when the monster arm appeared shortly after the Kachita incident 5 years ago. Since then, there have been rumors about a devil going around snacking on people like they were walking buffets. Yukino was scared, and honestly, Shindo should have been too, but let's be real, he's too dense to process fear properly. They decided to head to the lab again. This time, security wasn't about to let Shindo waltz in like he owned the place. Just when he was about to get sneaky and sneak in, he got caught. Lucky for him, the head scientist actually wanted to see him, so in he went, pretending like he knew what he was doing. As he was sipping some tea, Yukino's dad walked in and immediately told her to get out. She hit him with the classic daddy issues rant, complaining that he never talks to her ever since mom died, but after her dramatic exit, it was just Shindo and the scientist. Shindo, being the detective he thinks he is, accused the man of working with the creatures. The guy denied everything, saying those things were just fiction. Then he hit Shindo with some half-baked story about a drug addict going around killing people, which was about as believable as Shindo being a genius. Then he brought up some legend about alchemy, saying a devil was summoned and started eating people. To close the gates of hell and stop the madness, they needed to kill 108 devils walking the earth. Before Shindo could ask any more dumb questions, the scientist literally ran out the door. Shindo, not about to let him get away, chased after him, but the dude just vanished. That wasn't about to stop Shindo, though. He marched straight into the restricted part of the lab where no one was allowed. Ghostly creatures started phasing through the walls, reaching for him. He put up a weak fight, but in classic Shindo fashion, he got grabbed anyway. Then emerging from the shadows like the final boss in a video game was Yukino's dad, now a full-blown monster. And guess what? He was holding the devil's hand. This lunatic took a bite out of it like it was a gourmet meal, and boom, he became even more hideous. Shindo tried to fight, but it was like watching a toddler swing at a professional boxer. The monster was mopping the floor with him. Just when it looked like it was game over for our useless protagonist, Yukino jumped in to save him. She hit her dad with some disappointed daughter dialogue before passing out like a Disney princess. Monster Dad wasn't done though. He tried to send both of them straight to the afterlife, but then Shindo's tattoo started glowing again. The monster called him a symbiote, and then poof, they all disappeared. Right on cue, the SpecSec squad stormed in, slicing through zombies like they were cutting onions, but the big boss monster was already on the run. Unfortunately for him, he ran into some weirdo who sprouted tentacle arms and sliced him up like a holiday turkey. By the time SpecSec caught up to the scene, the mysterious slasher was long gone, leaving them to clean up the mess. This episode kicks off with Sakura having nightmares again, which, let's be real, isn't new. At this point, she should be charging rent for these phantoms living in her head. In the nightmare she's drawing, when she suddenly spots a guy standing in the distance, she moves closer to him, and the moment she reaches him, he literally slices her in half like she's a loaf of bread. Meanwhile, the higher-ups in SpecSec are having a top-secret meeting about Shindo's tattoos, just like Ranmaru's, which seems to be a big problem. They're basically debating whether to consider Shindo as part of humanity's last hope or just a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Spoiler alert, it's probably both. While all this serious talk is happening, Ranmuramasa is suffering in a different way. He's stuck with his annoying boss, the chief, who forces him to grab drinks when he's supposed to be working. If I'd rather be anywhere else had a face, it would be Shindo's. At first, he's chilling at the office, and everyone's celebrating the fact that the boss hasn't shown up, but his luck runs out when he's sent on a special assignment to babysit his boss. Luckily for him, Kureha shows up and gives him an escape route. She pulls up on her power bike, and even though the chief is yelling at the top of his lungs, she keeps telling him things he doesn't want to hear. Then she grabs Shindo's arm, and without a second thought, he ditches his boss faster than a bad first date and follows her. Kureha takes him all the way to Tokyo and immediately starts acting clingy. First, she unzips her shirt, showing off half her chest. Then she clings to his arm like a sacrificial offering all evening and drags him to different places. And after teasing him a lot and taking him to spots where couples sit and lock lips, she finally tells him to ask any question he wants. But he keeps beating around the bush. And honestly, I'm not about to waste my time repeating the nonsense he was asking. After that, Kureha takes him on a depressing field trip to a cemetery, which is definitely not an ideal place for a late-night hangout. Turns out her little brother Akito is buried there, and she's about to unleash a full trauma dump. She tells Ranmuramasa that she also lived in the Machida apartment complex back when it became a crime scene straight out of a horror movie. She and Akito were out when the massacre happened, so they rushed home, only to find blood everywhere and a creepy hole in the ground. Next thing they knew, they blacked out and woke up 2 years later in a hospital, which is never a good sign. Enter Ryoko Ibuki, who casually informs them that they now have mysterious tattoos and are what's called symbionts, meaning they have parasites inside them that can either turn them into monster hunters or just straight up monsters. Ryoko recruits them into Toko because, honestly, what else are you gonna do after being in a coma for 2 years? They get trained to fight phantoms and collect 108 magic fragments to close the gates of hell. Kureha even unzips her, bosom area to show Shindo her marks. Then she tells him she knows he has his too and warns him that, if he tries to awaken them, he'll either become a hunter or a monster. As they prepare to leave, Shindo asks how her brother moved on to the astral plane, and she jokes that she sent him there. But then she drops the real gut punch. Her brother didn't exactly get the hang of his new powers. Instead of becoming a cool phantom slayer, Akito lost control, transformed into a monster, and went on a rampage. And guess who had to take him out? Yep, Kureha herself. She doesn't say it out loud, just thinks about it and cries while riding. Oh, and before all that, bro got his first kiss from Kureha right before hopping on her bike. The episode opens with Inukai at the park watching kids play. It reminds him of his little sister who used to play and practice sword swinging with him. Lost in thought, he walks into the woods when he suddenly hears screams and he runs toward the noise only to find dissected bodies scattered on the ground. Looking around, he spots zombies fleeing and immediately gives chase. Before he can catch up, another victim falls into their hands. This time he makes sure they don't get away. He catches up and slices them in half as usual, but this time they don't die. Unaware of the threat, Inukai is stabbed from behind. The scene cuts to his superior, who storms into her higher-up's office, demanding that Shindo be awakened. He tells her that the top brass has ordered that Shindo must not be awakened. He also mentions that if Shindo is to be awakened, he'll first have to fight a phantom. If he survives, then he'll become a hunter. She decides to test him. She and the redhead check on Inukai, but then she leaves to go find Shindo. Meanwhile, Shindo is, as usual, having a bad day. At work, he's on the rooftop with his friends, whose biggest issue is that Shindo has been on too many dates. Just then, Ibuki shows up, snatches him away, and drags him on yet another date. She takes him around, buys him food, and then ditches him, saying they'll talk later. Suddenly, an earthquake begins, and somewhere a massive hole opens up. Later that night, Shindo gets a call from someone claiming they're going to explain everything to him. The caller tells him to head out to a specific location in the woods. Instead of grabbing a sword before heading out like a normal person, this genius decides to bring a piece of wood, because obviously that's the best weapon to fight monsters with. That was sarcasm. When he gets there, zombies start crawling out, trying to drag him down with them. But Shindo is resilient. He fights back. Just when one almost drags him under, he manages to escape. Then the main body of the monster appears and the real fight begins. But armed with only a piece of wood, Shindo is getting nowhere. He's tossed around like a ragdoll until Inukai and the redhead show up, slicing the creature apart. They cut off its hands, but now it tries to use its wings to escape. Too bad for it, those get chopped off too. Suddenly, the monster grows horns and lunges at Shindo, but before it can land a hit, it's sliced in half. The bloody remains leave behind a piece of the box. Inukai silently walks away, and when Shindo asks what's wrong with him, Inukai explains that during the Machida incident, he couldn't save his sister, and ever since he's been blaming himself. The episode opens with one of the phantoms jumping into the hole and undergoing some kind of empowerment before being blasted into the sky. Meanwhile, Shindo returns to the office, but everything feels off. Just then, the chief walks in, immediately accuses him of dating one of the girls from the 2nd Division and tells him not to give him any crap. Shindo is innocent, but before he can even defend himself, another earthquake hits. Before he can say anything else, he takes off running. He arrives at a crime scene where a woman has already been brutally sent to her maker. As soon as he gets there, a detective drags him aside and talks some sense into him. Instead of listening, Shindo decides to take a walk. That's when 2 agents pull up on him with a gun, ordering him to back off from the case. When he refuses, they threaten to get him sent to his maker if he insists on pushing forward. They leave him with a fresh warning. Shindo then decides he wants to see Ibuki. He heads to her office, where he nearly gets into a fight with a police officer before she steps outside. He tells her he wants to talk, and she lets him in. Inside, they discuss the possibility of him activating his hunter/demon side. Shindo says he already knows what's at stake, but Ibuki tells him that nothing is at stake because there's no need for it. The higher-ups think it'll be too dangerous for him to handle. She sends him off, saying it would be better if he doesn't transform because the risks are too high. After he leaves, Ibuki reports to her superior, who tells her she's letting him off too easily. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Shindo's sister is on her lunch break. On her way out, she gets hit by a car and is hospitalized. The moment Shindo hears about it, he rushes to the hospital, absolutely furious. He stays with her until she wakes up. Then later that night, he heads back to the hole, only to find the 2nd Division's SpecSec agents already there. They tell him they knew he'd come. He immediately asks if they were the ones who nearly got his sister killed, but they deny it, saying the real culprits are a group calling themselves the Society. Before they can discuss further, several demons crawl out of the hole, and the fight begins. The first wave of phantoms is easy to kill, but the ones that follow have regenerative powers that could rival Sukuna's. For the first time in a while, the team is getting their asses handed to them, and they find themselves backed up against the edge of the hole. With no other choice, they decide to awaken Shindo. They tell him not to die or give in to the devil. He gets stabbed and kicked into the hole, only to emerge moments later with an even bigger devil fused into him. With a single swing of his sword, he wipes out the phantoms in an instant. The episode starts with Shindo taking down a phantom with his new best pal, the redhead. He still hasn't quite gotten the hang of his powers and gets a little drowsy and dried up after a few swings. The redhead tells him it's only a matter of time before he gets used to them. In no time, the cleanup crew arrives to pick up the pieces, and then Shindo is taken to their famous hideout, which looks more like a rundown, empty apartment. He's shocked to see it in such a state, but they assure him it's only temporary. Ibuki gets a call and confirms that the phantom they just killed is number 12. Then Shindo asks about what Ibuki wanted to tell him before, but she couldn't because his activation process was more of a fight test than a proper initiation. She explains that there are 108 pieces and Shindo already has 14, but that's not really new information. What is new is that they also carry a piece of the box. They'll need all 108 pieces to seal the gate. Also, she decides to put everyone on a first-name basis. Back at home, his sister whips him up an all-out meal and tells him he shouldn't go around seeking revenge. He reassures her that she doesn't need to worry, but she says she will anyway because he's been acting a little odd lately. The next day, Shindo goes to the office wearing a black jacket with yellow stripes. It's a cool look, but his colleagues find it weird. Then the boss comes in and asks him what's up with the new style. Shindo starts to respond with, well, but before he can finish, the chief grabs him, demanding to know what he meant by, well. He then shoves a paper in his face, stating that Shindo has been transferred to the 2nd Division. However, he'll still technically be under the chief. He just has 2 bosses now. The chief, of course, still blames Toko for stealing his subordinate. Shindo returns to the dull hideout, still not impressed by it. Meanwhile, Ibuki faces a board of higher-ups who didn't want Shindo to be activated. She explains that she had no choice. Someone is trying to make humans coexist with these creatures, and she declares that this is turning into an all-out war. At the same time, the redhead is watching her brother in the hospital ward. It suddenly feels like he's about to move on to the astral plane, so she rushes in and checks his oxygen flow, only to find that he's fine. That night, something tries to attack Ibuki, but a barrier spell holds them back. She gets a call from a higher-up who commends her courage and warns her to be careful. The next day, Shindo is out with his friend, who won't stop talking about the many ladies in Shindo's life. Then a girl approaches and says she wants to visit Shindo's sister and see his room too. Before Shindo can react, a bullet is fired and barely misses him. The girl recognizes the car as the same one that hit his sister, and Shindo immediately takes off after it. He gets close, but the culprits still manage to escape. Later that night, Ibuki is attacked. A phantom sends its smaller demon henchmen after her. She manages to kill a few, but quickly becomes overwhelmed. She tries to escape, but it doesn't work out, and she almost falls from a great height. Just before she plummets, Shindo arrives in time to grab her hand and pull her to safety. She tells him that these are just lesser demons, and Shindo quickly senses where the main boss is. It's inside a tank a few buildings away. Without hesitation, Shindo heads over, fights the monster, and finishes it off with a powerful beam. The episode starts with eerie scenes of a haunted-looking building. Inside, a man is seen holding a deck of cards, placing them down one by one. He strikes one, and the scene shifts to Shindo and the redhead on a rooftop. She's worried about her brother, and they discuss what happened that day and how she used to spend all her time drawing. At some point, Shindo gave her some colored pencils he wasn't using anymore, which made her happy. Other kids would force her to play with them, but not Shindo. He always let her be herself, and that made her fall for him hard. As they hold hands and are about to kiss, Kuraha, the devil sent straight from hell, appears out of nowhere, completely ruining the moment, so they leave. The next day there's an earthquake. One demon wakes up alongside his brother, meaning there are now 2 of them on the loose. Ibuki says someone is toying with them. Later, Shindo is at the office where everyone treats him like an outsider. Then a case is called in and they all rush out, leaving him behind. Soon after, he gets a visitor. It's Yukino and she's brought food. She tells him she's discovered the truth about the drug and explains the whole drug story again, which at this point is already old news. Then she hands him a book. After that, Shindo goes into full study mode. While he's busy researching, his boss, let's just call him Maru, walks in and notices he's looking for an address. Maru offers to take him there. When they arrive, it turns out to be the same haunted house from the beginning of the episode. Shindo steps inside and an old man crawls into the room. The old man tells Shindo that everything he thinks he knows is a lie. He says Shindo has no idea who he really is and also reveals that he's the one who's been calling him, manipulating him, making him want to activate his powers. Because as the main character, Shindo is ridiculously strong. Shindo tries to fight him, but it's like swatting a fly. The old man defeats him instantly and puts him into a state I can only describe as limbo. While he's trapped in limbo, the scene shifts to the Toko hideout, where the others are gathered around him. He's completely unresponsive, and they're all worried. Then, out of nowhere, he wakes up, but instead of being himself, he starts swinging at everyone like a lunatic. They quickly realize that this isn't Shindo. Before things get worse, Ibuki shoots him down. The redhead decides to enter his mind and walk through his limbo. She sits him up, stabs a knife through them both, and kisses him. She wakes up inside his limbo, where he is aimlessly wandering, but another version of him appears and starts fighting her, injuring her in the process. Even so, she pushes forward until she reaches the real him, because love always prevails. And just like that, they're both pulled out of limbo. The episode starts with a flashback to the day of the Machida incident. The redhead was playing downstairs when she heard tremors. She ran upstairs, but by the time she got there, her brother had already been murdered, and she was pushed into the hole. The scene then shifts to the SpecSec team discussing what happened to Shindo. He tells them that he went to see the old man with Muramasa's help, and narrates everything that happened at the man's house, including how he ended up in limbo. Kureha teases him about the redhead kissing him before she entered his mind, calling him innocent. The next scene takes place in a lab where the redhead's brother is being held. Doctors are running tests on him when a phantom suddenly appears and wipes them all out. Meanwhile, a group of phantoms is seen causing chaos, feasting on flesh. The Toko Sword Squad arrives and starts cutting them down, but these phantom troopers are different. Whenever they get cut, they regenerate instantly. The team relies on Shindo, their built-in phantom detector, to locate the nearest main body. After a few seconds of scanning, he fires a beam in the direction of the primary target. Just when they think it's over, they realize the main body was none other than the redhead's brother. Let's call him 80. 80 is still trapped in limbo, and his only goal is to send them all to their makers. A fight breaks out, but the redhead stops them, saying she can fix him. She steps closer and starts talking to him. He admits that all he ever wanted was to talk to her, but when she reaches out to touch him, he suddenly slashes at her. The fight resumes, and when AT starts feeling overwhelmed, he vanishes. At that moment, Shindo spots the old man and rushes to catch him, but the man fades away like mist. Back at the Toko hideout, the team tends to the redhead's injuries. They explain that AT is still in limbo, neither a full demon nor a full demon hunter, just like Shindo was a short while ago. Determined to find her brother, the redhead makes up her mind to go after him. The team tries to stop her, but Shindo decides to go with her. Elsewhere, Muramasa is seen trying to encrypt some data when Ibuki suddenly appears out of nowhere, pointing a gun at his head. She demands to know where the old man is, but Muramasa claims he doesn't know. He tries to outwit her and grab her gun, but she overpowers him and cuffs him to the table. She heads to the Toko hideout, only to learn that the redhead and Shindo have already gone to the Machida house, the same place where the old man is. At the Machida house, the two lovebirds reminisce about their childhood and the events of that tragic day. They hold hands, lean on each other, and just when things start heating up, before they can take off their clothes and move on to other activities, 80 appears. The redhead tries to talk him out of limbo. He deceives her with his words, but Shindo sees right through it. A fight breaks out. The redhead, too heartbroken to lift a finger against her brother, doesn't even draw her sword. Then Inukai arrives and tells Shindo to focus on the phantom troopers while he handles AT. With a single slash, both AT and Inukai are gone. The episode starts with Ibuki's boss watching the news. Ibuki walks in saying she has to do something. Her boss warns her that he won't be able to cover for her anymore, but she says she knows the consequences and is ready to face them. The scene shifts to Shindo and his girl. He asks if she's okay after what happened to her brother, but she assures him that she's fine and that she knew something like this was bound to happen. Then, Ibuki enters with an arrest warrant for the old man Taichi. She informs Shindo that Taichi is one of them, but they call themselves higher beings. The team also pulls out the book Yukino gave Shindo and explains that it took exactly 12 people to close the box, and coincidentally 12 people survived the Machida event. Saya is still in danger, so they decide to move her to Ibuki's apartment, hoping it will be safer. But peace doesn't last long. Ibuki, fed up with Muramasa's sneaky behavior, corners him and forces a confession out of him. It turns out he's been selling information to Taichi in exchange for bribes. Not exactly a shocking revelation, but it still annoys the team. While they deal with this mess, Taichi isn't sitting idle. He knows Toko is after him, so he sends even more Gakis to take them out for good. The Gakis attack, and the Toko members fight back with everything they have. While the girls handle their fights with confidence, Kureha calls the newbie Shindo to warn him about the danger, but he already has it covered. He takes out a few enemies and starts running, but it feels like bait, and it is. When he gets to the lower levels, he encounters a stronger Gaki that lands a heavy blow. Just then, the Araragi siblings show up in time to help. Together, they manage to survive the fight. Shindo has a conversation with the siblings who reveal that they kill and eat these monsters as revenge for what they did to their parents. But this isn't a victory. Taichi is still out there and they need to take him down once and for all. Ibuki leads the team on a raid of his heavily guarded mansion, ready to end this. The place is crawling with security, but Toko doesn't care. They push through, disarming the guards rather than killing them. For a moment, it looks like they've finally won. They make their way inside and use Shindo's sensors to locate Taichi. They enter a room filled with phantoms and begin cutting them down. In the chaos, Shindo finds himself in another room, separated from the rest, who are locked out. Taichi tells Shindo that he only wanted him as his audience. He starts trying to manipulate Shindo's mind, but Shindo fights back with the power of love, literally. The team finally breaks in and attacks, but Taichi, the slippery snake that he is, manages to escape at the last second. Just when they think things can't get worse, the police show up. Out of nowhere, Ibuki is arrested on charges of falsifying documents and attempting to murder Muramasa. Obviously, this is a setup to get her out of the way. Frustrated but not defeated, the team returns to Ibuki's apartment, expecting to rest. Instead, Shindo walks in and finds the place completely trashed. His heart sinks as he realizes Saya is gone. This episode starts with everything falling apart. Ibuki is still locked up on false charges, and that's where we pick up. We see Ibuki being put in a special cell to keep Shindo and the rest from rescuing her. Toko has been officially disbanded, and Saya is in Taishi's hands. Taishi did this so Shindo would have to make a choice. What we see next is Shindo, furious and desperate, knowing that if he doesn't act now, both might not make it. Without waiting, they all go on a mission, determined to take back Ibuki. Meanwhile, Muramasa and the chief are going head-to-head, and it's not looking good for the chief. But with his tricky moves, like using a cigarette, he gets the chance to land a clean blow. The chief asks Muramasa what he meant when he said he was going to take care of Shindo. The girls are trying to break down the cell door holding Ibuki, but it's no use. Then the chief comes in and says the only way to bring it down is by using a bomb. They talk and he tells them that he knows part of the truth. He asks if those monsters are really good, and the answer is clear, they're not. They strap a bomb to the door and blow it open while all the security outside just stands there cluelessly. Just as the girls escape, the cops show up. Shindo, on the other hand, heads straight to Taishi's hideout, which, of course, is crawling with phantoms. Shindo has a conversation with the devil himself, and Taishi says he is just a symbiote like Shindo. He explains that some people told him to open the portal with 12 others over 100 years ago. He tells Shindo that he's the chosen one and that he'll have to kill the rest to take their power and close the gates to hell. This enrages Shindo, and he draws his sword. He starts cutting through the creatures with everything he's got, moving like a beast, his rage fueling every attack. Then Taishi starts using his powers. Just as Shindo begins to get overwhelmed, the remaining Toko members show up. Just then, Taishi jumps into the pit, and because Kureha is injured, only Shindo and the redhead jump in. When they land, they find themselves in what looks like a mini version of hell. They cut through some phantoms like it's nothing. Then Taishi baits Shindo by using his sister's image. He tells Shindo that he must take everyone's power and then jumps deeper into the pit. The redhead looks at Shindo and tells him that he has to kill her, but he refuses. She starts attacking, and when she sees an opening, she throws her sword away and impales herself on his sword. She passes on to the afterlife, and he absorbs her power. The power fuses with him, and he jumps into the pit. When he gets there, it looks like the aftermath of a brutal massacre with ancient ruins scattered everywhere. He runs until he sees Saya hanging, trapped by restraints that keep regenerating. As he tries to free her, Taishi appears and tells Shindo that he has already taken one power and will soon take the rest. Taishi hands over Shindo's sister and they start to fight. The anime, or at least this season, ends with a massive explosion from the depths of the hole. Pieces scatter everywhere and the hole closes. And that leaves more questions, just like in AOT. Did we just lose our protagonist? How are these demons going to stop feeding on people like they're munching on snacks? Will the gates ever close? Hit the like and subscribe button to find out.